When the Terra Foundation moved into this location last year, as many of you know who have been with us for the past few months, we conceived this series in homage to our neighbors and colleagues at the Fondation Custodia as a way of celebrating cultural exchange between the Netherlands and the United States. And this kind of exchange is personified in the figure of Piet Mondrian, who is our subject this evening, a Dutch artist who spent a brief but significant portion of his life in the United States. And this exchange is also personified in the two very distinguished scholars that we have with us this evening. Hans Janssen, as curator at the Gemeentemuseum in Den Haag, works with the world's largest collection of Mondrian's work and in the artist's native country, whereas Nancy Troy, professor at Stanford University, has meticulously researched Mondrian's presence in the United States, both his work completed there and that work's afterlife, as she phrases it. In the Netherlands and in America, these two scholars have contributed to the same publications, footnoted each other, and were even speaking at the same conference together last week in Amsterdam, as I understand. So it's an honor to bring them together here in Paris for our final dialogue. Thanks, both of you, for being here. I'd also like to acknowledge our colleagues at the Fondation Custodia, although unfortunately most of them are not here since our dialogue happens to fall on a Dutch national holiday. Nevertheless, Custodia is very much present in the form of a display which has been put together by curators from our two institutions, which is out in the hallway, and which I invite you to take a look at after the presentations this evening. The material is correspondence between Mondrian, Oud, and van Doesburg. I've been working on my Dutch pronunciation, still struggling, from the 1920s, which, as you know, was a crucial time for Mondrian in the formation of his aesthetics theories. We also have some documents from 1945 from the Terra Foundation Library, which speak to the beginning of the afterlife of him and of his work. The Fondation Custodia curator, Hans Buys, is here with us, despite the holiday, and I'm sure he'll be happy to respond to any questions about the material and also about the wonderful collection at Custodia of archives and also books in the library. So thank you to Hans, as well as to the Terra Foundation curatorial team, Catherine Bourguignon, curator, and Julie Boulage. So this dialogue series has been an opportunity to dive into many moments of an evolving and multifaceted history of exchange. We've gone from early European exploration of the American continent to the thriving trade in New Holland in the 17th century, and just last week to the Holland mania that in the late 1800s had seized the nation, that had by then been through a civil war and a centennial. Tonight's discussion on Piet Mondrian brings us into the 20th century, through the Second World War, and even up to today through this notion of afterlife that we'll certainly be hearing more about very shortly. It is worth mentioning in a series dedicated to Dutch-American cultural exchange that Mondrian is not American, nor did he spend too much of his life in the Netherlands. And yet, in the 3-some years that he spent in New York, he produced some of his most well-known work, and it is also there where many of the key scenes in his afterlife took place. It can also be argued that in his approach and in his theories, there was something Dutch about him that remained, although that's something that can be discussed. In any case, he's a figure who invites us to think critically and expansively about national identity as a category in the visual arts and about geographical location as a tool for art historical inquiry. So the key word for us to retain this evening is probably neither Holland nor America, but rather dialogue and exchange. And on that note, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Nancy Troy is the Victoria and Roger Sant Professor in Art at Stanford University. Her work on Mondrian and on de Stijl spans 4 decades. She completed her PhD on de Stijl in 1979 and published her book, The de Stijl Environment, in 1983, which we have on display as well from the Terra Foundation Library, from the Custodia Library. And the same year, she mounted the exhibition Mondrian and Neoplasticism in America at the Yale University Art Gallery. Now, flash forward, just 3 years ago in 2013, she published The Afterlife of Piet Mondrian with the University of Chicago Press, which we also have for your perusal, which is really a kind of a breathtaking study and examination of what happened to the legacy of Piet Mondrian after his death and of his works. In addition, Nancy has published a number of very significant books on design, decorative arts and fashion, notably Modernism and the Decorative Arts in France, Art Nouveau to Le Corbusier from 1991, and Couture Culture, a study in modern art and fashion, published in 2003, as well as countless articles, books, chapters, and so on. She's taught at institutions including University of Southern California, UCLA, Northwestern, and Johns Hopkins. She's worked with museums including the High Museum of Art, the Harvard University Art Museums, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Yale University Art Gallery. Thank you, Nancy, for being here. Hans Janssen is curator at the Gemeentemuseum in Den Haag, where he has been since 1991. He's worked on numerous exhibitions on Mondrian, including the major retrospective held in 1994 on the 50th anniversary of the artist's death. And here in Paris, he did the show at the Musée d'Orsay from 2002, Mondriaan 1892-1914, Les Chemins de l'Abstraction, which was phenomenal. I went to see it about 5 times. Mondrian in the Gemeentemuseum Den Haag in 2008, Mondrian and Cubism, Paris 1912-1914 in 2014, and just last year, Piet Mondrian at the Martin Gropiusbau in Berlin, amongst many others. His publications, in addition to the catalogs for all of these various exhibitions, include The Story of de Stijl, Mondrian to Van Doesburg with Michael White, and Inside Out, Victory, Boogie-Woogie, a material history of Mondrian's masterpiece, to which I believe Nancy was also contributing as well. There will be a new biography of Mondrian coming out very soon now, in both Dutch and English from Hans. So we have that to look forward to. So thank you, Hans, very much for being here. Yes, as I mentioned, there will be the display and the books to peruse after the presentations. We also invite you all to stay and have a glass and continue the conversation after we've had our dialogue with these two this evening. Again, Nancy and Hans, thank you so much for being here. And I leave it now to you.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say some words on this subject. I chose as a title Mondriaan, Mondriaan, so double A, single A, because it is exemplary for the difference between the Dutch Mondriaan and the American Mondriaan. Here we see some of the signatures the artist did, published in 1956 by Michel Sephore, and already at that time there was this peculiarity that this up to here it is Mondriaan, then it is suddenly Mondriaan, 1914, 1907, and then it stays Mondriaan until the end. And the differences in handwriting are also obvious. It came down to become the myth, a very mythical idea of that Mondriaan started to be so modern, so exuberant, so totally out of control from the past that he even discarded his own history. The vision starts here in 1914, but also this work of 1907 is signed with one A, but that is because it is an amaryllis flower that he took with him to New York and signed Mondriaan, 1907. And then, because the owner wanted his first name also, he called it Piet. So he put it in front of it. So the real breaking point between the Mondriaan and Mondriaan, I must say, is 1914. Then was the point that he started to change from being old-fashioned to be a truly modern artist. As made clear by Jennifer, I was involved with organizing the retrospective exhibition in 1994, being a young curator at a Gemeentemuseum, being in touch with an international group of scholars, in which there were 3 Americans and 2 Europeans, of which I was one. And the other one was Joop Joosten, the distinguished Joop Joosten. But he was so shy that he didn't want to discuss anything. He simply told how things had to be arranged. And he had an immense feeling for the American way of approaching life and art. And he cherished the late abstract Mondrian as well. So he was sort of American too. So I felt quite alone, and the collection of the Gemeentemuseum, of which I was in charge, housed about 300 works, of which the vast majority, with the exception of almost 30 works, was before 1914, so it was double A, let's say. And we had severe discussions in the group of in the curatorial team about what to do with the early work and the late work. And I wanted to have a good, sound, retrospective exhibition, and in which also the early work up to 1911, 1912 would have given a good place. But the Americans only wanted to show the late work. And, you know, after 1914, and maybe even the best after 1921. The real abstract, quintessential Mondrian, about which Nancy will come to speak. And I had a hard time, and I did lose, I must say. I was defeated by the team, but I was glad about that, because it gave the opportunity to show in Holland about 70 major abstract Mondrian paintings, a thing which will never happen again in Europe, and not even in the United States, I'm sure. It was, I think, the best exhibition I did make, and I didn't make a point of not having the early work in the exhibition. This is a book issued in 1993. So around the time I was working on the retrospective exhibition. It is the Tokoro Gallery exhibition catalogue, the cover, and it shows a nameplate, an animal nameplate with Piet Mondrian, double A. It was found by Harry Holtzman in the inventory of the studio, along with paintbrushes, magnifying glasses, pliers, and a hammer. There is rust and tear and wear along the bottom, which shows that it was used. It was not bought and put into a cupboard, it was used. We do not know where it was used. Lastly, if it was used in New York, if it was used in Paris, we don't know. But I think the first opportunity it could have been made, or it could have been acquired by the artist, was this, for this studio in the Safati Straat. He was having this a top apartment around until 1912, December 1911. He was a rich man. He sold quite a lot of his landscapes, and he from here he went to Paris to become a modern artist. He broke with his own past. The most important sign of this was that he was, as a well-to-do landscape painter in Holland, he had a fiancée, Greta Heybroek, a girl from a very wealthy, chic family in Laren. And he wanted to marry her, but he suddenly decided in December 1911, after seeing the works of Cézanne and Picasso and Braque in an exhibition in Amsterdam, he decided, if I want to know exactly what is going on in the field of modern art and I want to compete with what is going on there, I have to go out of Holland, I have to leave Holland and I have to go to Paris. And I will not earn money, I will not be a successful landscape painter anymore, and I will not be able to sustain a family. That was a very important thing, because he had a friend, a very good friend, Kees Spoor. He was a painter, a theosophical painter of portraits and landscapes. And Kees Spoor had a family of 6 kids and a wife that wanted to buy dresses all the time. And so she needed a lot of money, and for that reason, Kees Spoor all the time had to do lots of things that he didn't want to do, that didn't bring him a real artwork, but he had to produce work for the market, let's say. And that was a thing Mondriaan detested, and he thought it was a nightmare. So he wanted to leave that. So he broke up with his fiancée and went to Paris. But that moment was significant because he broke with his past, let's say, in mythical terms. This is the catalogue of the Moderne Kunstkring exhibition in 1913 in Amsterdam. It was the exhibitions of the Moderne Kunstkring were introducing modern art in Holland. And as you can see, the entry shows that the artist is living in Paris 26 Rue du Départ. He is Hollandais and he is sociétaire. So he is part of the group of the Moderne Kunstkring. He writes his letter with 1 A and he gives his titles in French. So he is completely French. He is not any longer Dutch. And that was irritating to lots of artists' friends of his. They thought he wanted to distinguish himself, to not be any longer Mondriaan, but to get on another identity. That might have been the case also a little bit, because Mondriaan himself chose deliberately to break with his, for example, with his uncle in this way. He wrote it also in a letter, that is, sometimes people changed him with the name of his uncle or his work, and he wanted to distinguish himself in that respect from this uncle, who made very old-fashioned The Hague School landscape paintings. So at this time, 1912, 1913, people started to be irritated, and it was in 1924 or 2004 that I got a very angry email from Hilary Richardson, the lady who was in charge of the Mondriaan Holtzman Trust, defending the copyrights and earning money from every reproduction of the work of the artist. Hilary Richardson told me bluntly that the Gemeentemuseum had to write Mondrian with one A and not any longer with double A, what we were accustomed to do. But the policy that we have is, as long as we are writing in Dutch or publishing in Dutch, it will be double A. As long as we are writing in French, German, English, it is 1A. But she gave clearly the sign that it was forbidden. We wanted to keep him small. We wanted to keep him little Mondriaan with double A, the silly landscape painter, the denial of the truly modern, you know, a 19th century backward guy. We wanted to be him. We wanted to keep him the old-fashioned 19th century painter. So there is a sort of resistance in this from the other side, Hilary Richardson, from the other side than the artists who wanted Mondrian to write his name with one or with double A in Holland. Oh, and this is the difference between the two sorts of work, because I didn't show any work up to now. The Red Tree, evening of 1908, 1910 on the left side, and this is the painting Tableau 1, a reproduction of the painting, of 1921. And there isn't a bigger contrast thinkable, I think, within the work of one artist. A man who paints very expressively in the manner of Van Gogh, and even surpassing him in the image of a single tree in blues and reds, very, very burny and very shiny and very expressively loaded. And the work on the right side, which is, you know, clear, pristine, and very sharply distinguished, contrasted colors that are applied in single shades without any brushstroke and without any personal or individual expression. But what a reproduction can't show, but only the real work will show or can show, is that both works have the same sort of power. They are both, in a sense, as I always say, energy centrales. What is that called? Powerhouses. They shine forth their energy, and it is visible. You can imagine it from a reproduction with the left image, but you can't with the right image. So Mondrian is, I think, a painter that is hardly reproducible. He is reproducible, but what you see is a sort of static, graphic element, and not the real thing itself. And the real thing itself is so difficult to approach or to achieve. I always say to people who are coming to the Gemeentemuseum and want to know about the abstract work of Mondrian, that I go, which I often do, through the collection of the Gemeentemuseum, and I take my hat off for Picasso, I take my hat off for Kirchner, for the Schiele. They are all friends, you know, friends and girlfriends and whatever. But with Mondrian, I always am startled, as if I meet something for the first time. It is hard to get, it is impossible to get, it is absolutely astonishingly beautiful, as if you want to know more about it without being able to come easy to it. Here is the artist, because the artist himself, as a person, is also reflecting this opposition between Mondrian with double A and Mondrian with single A. This is a reproduction of the artist in 1906, at the time that he made this landscape, evening, very successful painting, very big, almost 2.5 meters wide and 1 meter 20 high. It is in a private collection in Switzerland, hardly shown, but we were able to show it, to get it for the exhibition we did in Berlin, where it did shine forth tremendously, because the ground is very, very densely painted and very, very material, and the sky above is ethereal and ephemeris. Let's say it is hardly touchable. And the same artist produced a year later this tremendous painting, Mill in Sunlight, from the collection of the Gemeentemuseum, in which the brushwork and the expressiveness of the image is very much geared up, let's say. This is the official note that Mondriaan had to make while he was in Paris for the police. He had to say what the color of his eyes were. He had to say who his father was, who his mother was. You know, everything about himself. His carte the information to provide the carte d'identité. It says Mondriaan, Peter Cornelis, and at this occasion, I think the idea of changing his name may have come to his mind, because he told later to Van Doesburg that the people at the police prefecture were laughing like hell, because his first name was Piet, which spells in French as Piet. It's not possible to say a I-E as E. It is Piet. And then Mondriaan with double A spells as Mondriaan. So this guy was called Piet Mondriaan. And they laughed about it, and he must have felt very much ashamed about it. And also when he brought his paintings to the Salon des Indépendants, they didn't want to file him under the name Mondriaan with double A. So there was opposition also from the authorities and from the people he worked with. And it was more easy for him to change his name, because he didn't want to explain so much. He just wanted to play down a little bit. And so he signed, for that reason, he signed his work with P. Mondriaan. So he avoided, with the P dot, he avoided the writing of Piet. This is the permit for the Musée du Louvre, 1912, saying Mondriaan with double A. He got the authorization to make a copy. It was said in the literature of the painting in the Louvre by Enguerrand Quarton, one of the earliest late medieval religious paintings in France that could concur, let's say, that could play a role that the French, though the Flemish primitives played for the Dutch art. So an early beginning. And because it was an early beginning, it was cherished by most of the cubists of Montparnasse, and Mondriaan was one of them. So he made a copy for a friend of his, a woman who made a collection of cubist painting, and she wanted to have the painting as a copy. But this is Abel Fèvre, La Femme à l'Éventail, a painting that is now in the vaults, I think, of the Marmottan. It was a very famous painting at that time. And he made a copy of it as well, Mondriaan, at the same time. So we just found this out last year. So the permit with Mondriaan, double A, in France, was also for this. Whoop, it goes very fast now. All right. No. And this is at the bottom, we have here the newspaper, the Dutch newspaper, which says that in June and July 1914, there is an exhibition of Piet Mondrian to Paris at the Galerie Walrecht in The Hague. And there he showed all paintings signed with Piet Mondrian. So then it was very clear from that moment on, this is one of the paintings, Mondrian, it doesn't even show the P, Mondrian 1914. This is a very early picture with the original frame, and that is why I want to show it in black and white. And this is the detail of the signature, showing that underneath it is overpainted, but underneath is Mondrian with double A and 1913. So he repainted the picture, painted the signature over, and chose to change the signature as well. This is the Société des Artistes Indépendants 1913. It shows P. Mondrian. So from that moment on, it was clear that Mondrian with double A, the guy who looked like this while he painted it with the beard, he went to Paris and shaved his beard also. He became a modern man, and ended up in the United States with this photograph of Helmut Newton done in 1942, with the look of a Hollywood director, a successful businessman, you know, one of the greatest modern painters alive, and who died doing this work, The Victory, Boogie-Woogie, photographed by Fritz Glader in the studio. This is a short introduction that I wanted to give. I want to give the floor now to Nancy, but maybe there are already questions. Not yet. Okay, thank you.
I want to thank you also for the invitation to talk in the presence of Hans. And I already see things that overlap, excuse me, in our interests. I'll come back to, in a moment, to that Arnold Newman photograph. But I wanted to start by just saying, you know, I was really interested to see the Terra's announcement of this dialogue, because instead of there being a Mondrian painting, there's a Mondrian dress, which I think is hugely relevant, and I want to try to unpack in the things that I'm going to say kind of fairly quickly some points that might help us understand why it is that today the Terra is thinking about Mondrian and America by segueing through a designer, very prominent French designer, who segued also through America, particularly with this dress. But anyway, I think it's really interesting, and it also corresponds to the kinds of things, the work I've done on Mondrian to date, so, or some of it. And you all can tell me if it kind of, if you know, obviously I was looking at this announcement, which normally you don't do that much. Maybe you read part of the text. You all decided to be here, so that's a commitment already. But anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting, and I want to try to think about how that came about. Of course, I'm projecting onto everybody at the Terra Foundation who had anything to do with this. I wanted to just, so I'm going to go very quickly through these images. The one on the top left is to sort of signal the death of Mondrian. This was a really famous photograph, especially in black and white, because it circulated through the Museum of Modern Art and so on. And it has some iconic features to it, particularly because the painting Victory Boogie-Woogie is now safely ensconced in the Gemeentemuseum. So anyway, Mondriaan died in February 1st, 1944, and the following year, the Museum of Modern Art mounted a retrospective exhibition, a version of which was also shown in Holland. But these are 3 images of that exhibition. It's kind of interesting because at the time, the paintings that could be shown had to be, all in American collections. It wasn't possible to borrow works during the war, during the war, from Dutch collections. But in any event, I just want to point out the kind of severe modernist installation and the character of what Mondriaan was presented, how his work was presented in very general terms. And at the same time, Mondriaan's heir, Harry Holtzman, arranged for a number of essays, some of which had previously appeared and some were newly appearing translations into English. And this was a small pamphlet that represented Mondriaan's writings and theoretical pronouncements, as it were, to English language readers. And it was read, so there were quite a few printings into the mid-1950s. It was read by students, art students, and anybody, other artists. It was in a series that was edited by Robert Motherwell that was really an important series on modern art. So the reason why I want to say that is because Mondriaan's work was, by whoever read it, recognized as being particularly difficult to read, including by his the people who were translating his work in the United States for eventual publication in a volume of collected works. Mondriaan's language, whether it was in Dutch, in French, or in English, was not easy. And so this kind of first really larger audience-related presentation after his death kind of was received with difficulty by not only the average visitor to the museum, but by many critics. And it emerges that even people who were on the exhibition committee of the Museum of Modern Art weren't quite sure they should make this exhibition because they couldn't tell one late Mondriaan from another, according to a MoMA employee who worked with that committee. So Mondriaan was a difficult artist to look at, to understand, to encounter, and the theoretical work that was supposed to kind of be there to explain it was at least as difficult. So I wanted also to kind of return to this photograph by Arnold Newman because I think it presents Mondriaan. You said, which is really interesting, that he looks like a Hollywood mogul. So yours was a shorter version. Maybe there's something about the top here. To me, he looks like somebody who is suffering on the cross. So I have a really different take on this image, and I think that's my interpretation is totally obvious, so that's clearly not the case. But I think he looks sad and, really like the victim here. And I don't know if there's really time to read it. God, I'm giving away all my secrets here. But these are some remarks about and by the artist who made the photograph. And he was dedicated basically at this point. He was a portrait photographer, a very young portrait photographer, and his kind of claim to fame and what he made his early reputation on was photographing artists in their studios and making a kind of composition that was not only a portrait, but which somehow connected them through their poses or something that was going on with them with their work. And so he's constantly talking about how he used, for example, very severe lines. He says in that first part, this is actually somebody else I'm quoting, William Ewing, but he quotes Newman, who thought about Mondrian as stiff, linear, very formal. So he's talking about the work, but comparing that to the man himself. So I think Mondrian's initial, this is just to summarize, where we're starting around the time of his death is somebody who was really a difficult figure to grapple with for American audiences who were just, getting introduced to the idea of abstract art. That was all very contentious in critical writing in places like the New York Times. So it was published, large debates about this, but Mondrian, of course, was probably the most demanding figure. He had a small circle, a large number of artists who had respected him tremendously, and there were some who were working really closely as followers of Mondrian, but for the general public, this was really, really difficult. So I wanted to also sort of think about how we move from there. This is just another photograph that Arnold Newman talks again about how he organized the painting. So he didn't come across this composition and just click it, at an instant. He framed Mondrian, as he did with the other portrait. There are a number of rejected versions of it. He moved the paintings around, and he was very self-conscious about lining things up so that the paintings, the architectural surround, the man himself, and so on, would kind of correspond to this pretty dour figure that that became kind of the public face of Mondrian, despite the fact that those who knew him well in New York and perhaps also, presumably also in Paris, actually understood. He loved to dance, he loved parties, he actually, he loved jazz music, as is probably very well known, and so on. So he was not this figure that Arnold Newman's very successful and widely known photographs made him out to be, and that was encountered in the work and that critics struggled with. So I think some of the ways in which Mondrian began to have a different kind of public persona had to do with the ways in which his work was presented in relation to contemporary fashion. I'm not going to get into this too long, but even in some of the wording of presentations like this in fashion photography and the women's magazines presented him as very simple, or it's not by accident that behind this woman is not a Kandinsky, it's a Mondrian. It echoes the long silhouette of this tall woman and her dress and the linear quality of her belt and the bracelet she's wearing, kind of echoing some of the characteristics of Mondrian's painting, which is kind of just out there. But so I haven't really, I wouldn't argue this in any conscious way, but I do think that Mondrian stands there with his paintings in a way that's just not all that different from how he was presented in fashion magazines. I don't think he planned it that way, and probably Arnold Newman, who was really struggling to be an art portrait photographer, would have hated the idea that there could be this kind of low commercial or crass commercial connection. But it was very common for artists, but is rather common for Mondrian to be seen and presented in these contexts, which you could say on the one hand really compromised his paintings as kind of wallpaper or just another frame for the dress of this woman, posed obviously to fit in the frame of Mondrian's painting. But again, when you read the text, there's all sorts of kind of terms that suggest simplicity. It's this very plain silhouette, and so on. So I think the people who are writing that kind of copy are very conscious of kind of tying modern fashion or contemporary fashion in with the images in which, in front of which, and partly obscuring the painting, these dresses are posed. And one of the very early, so those were the two earliest kinds of juxtapositions like that. But very early on, you can see here, there were models posing in Mondriaan's studio in New York after he died and kind of leaning all over his paintings. So this is a version of what a very well-known English art historian has called, has compared to the nightmare of every modernist artist or scholar. But in any case, I use it to show how ubiquitous, or how widespread at least, this kind of presentation of Mondriaan's work was. And in the gallery here, you'll also see that his work was presented as well in other kinds of magazines, Life magazine being a very important one, so that it got a kind of circulation and coverage and could reach people, granted in certain kinds of ways that we might not all think were ideal, but it could gain an audience amongst people who were never going to go see a Mondriaan in the Museum of Modern Art, much less in the Gemeentemuseum. But, so one of the things that changes here with this dress by Stella, well, it's an outfit by Stella Brownie, is that there are two things. One is that she's actually wearing the art, or something that is clearly inspired by Mondriaan, or anyway, I'll get to that in a second. And she's also appearing in an established art museum, art journal. So that the relationship Mondriaan fashion is changing in this already early period. And she's really the first person that I know of who actually made Mondriaan outfits. She actually had gone to the retrospective exhibition, and she had supposedly studied his theories, bought the book, and tried to read her way into making an authentic Mondriaan expression. And you can see that she kind of, in this version, there are a kind of horizontal, vertical juxtaposition, light and dark. She got it inverted, to be sure. It's on a dark ground with light forms. We don't have a color outfit, but a photograph of this. But the idea is that she is trying to express what I would call her art historical chops by, making these kinds of designs. And there were others that, I haven't seen any of these in person, but when this was described in the newspaper, it says, well, it's bright geometric colors in opposition one to another, and so on. But when you read the captions more carefully, it turns out that, and you see the photograph, is much more like a chevron with diagonal forms. It happens to be on a purple ground, so that's a kind of something obviously not in Mondriaan's palette. So there's something to be said for, in 1945, this woman, Stella Brownie, kind of understood that Mondriaan was what she got from Mondriaan was abstraction, bright colors, geometry, but she wasn't really thinking in terms that were what I was describing as art. Despite her study of Mondriaan's theories and so on, what she saw in Mondriaan was presumably not necessarily something that was actually there. She adapted, and I think that's important historically because it's so very different from what another person who had actually not necessarily seen Mondrian paintings by this time, in 1965. So 20 years later, when Yves Saint Laurent made his Mondrian-derived, based, inspired designs, they looked and they were received as very close to the paintings themselves. And in fact, there are some very hilarious descriptions by, not descriptions, but reviews by journalists who are talking about, if you get tired of wearing your Mondrian painting, you can always hang it on the wall as a dress and things like that. So to me, what was so striking was the difference. Here was somebody, Stella Brownie, who had gone to the museum, really struggled presumably, or at least wanted to appear to have looked at Mondrian, and that must have been some of her PR. That was why her work was in the Art News and supported by Art News and so on. But her work didn't quite get it, and not only that, it kind of was a flash in the pan. I'd be surprised if any of you had heard of Stella Brownie or Fox Brownie, which was the company she worked for. It kind of wanted to make the mode, but it kind of missed its mark. Whereas, of course, I think the opposite is the case with the series of dresses that Yves Saint Laurent, Yves Saint Laurent made. I'm going to come back to that. But I want to ask or pose the question why this would have been the case. What had happened between 1945 and 1965 that might have set the stage for anyone to think radically differently about Mondrian? And I'm not saying that Yves Saint Laurent was reading American magazines, excuse me, but the material that was circulating very widely in the US, and I'd have to look to see if that was also the case in Europe, looked a lot like this, very early on, thank you. Already in 1945, 46, 47, there was a lot of graphic design that was inspired by Mondrian. One of the reasons for that, which Hans alluded to, is the fact that in a reproduction of Mondrian's work from this period, it looks very graphically powerful. You can't see the brushstrokes, as you might be able to, actually, even in the photograph that you showed of the painting on the right. Even though you said you have to be standing in front of it to go, wow, the possibility for photographs today is so much more detailed and so on. You can at least get the sense that there is a texture. Whereas when you look at the Life magazine images, you'll know that they were actually not even made from photographs of Mondrian's paintings. They were put together from typographical blocks, maybe having to do with the timing, war conditions, and so on. In any case, one of the things that's important to understand about Mondrian is that in the circulation of his work through these kind of more popular sites, it was the graphic power of the work that could be seen in a reproduction that came across, because these other much more subtle aspects of the work weren't apparent. One other thing that was going on during this period is that this is a publication of the Museum of Modern Art based on an exhibition in 1949, and you can see where there are comparisons being made between Mondrian's paintings and architecture, between Mondrian's paintings and, well, architecture, but also interior design and furniture features, or here, graphic design, other pieces of furniture, a box of Kleenex tissues, and typography and graphic design layouts of magazines of all different kinds. One of the reasons the museum was doing this was to try to get people not to freak out so much that they were confronted, as they had been in 1945, with paintings they couldn't understand. So they were constantly telling their audiences, don't worry, like you can live with Mondrian. You might even want to have a Mondrian painting around you because they're all around you anyway. Mondrian has inspired contemporary architecture, graphic design, furniture, etc. You can feel comfortable with this. This is a feature of everyday life by now. That was a very strong element of design discourse around Mondrian. Furthermore, in 1956, again, what made Mondrian more familiar than he had been in 1945 was the appearance of Michel Sufor's book, from which Hans pulled the images of these signatures. It was a semi-scholarly book. It presented all the known images of all the known paintings in kind of black and white thumbnails. It showed you the changing character of his signature and so on. The text, maybe not so scholarly, but there was a kind of, nevertheless, it was the first monograph on Mondrian, and it was published in French, English, and German, and it's probably still being sold in bookstores today. It's had an incredibly long life. So probably I shouldn't call it a scholarly book, because scholarly books don't tend to have that long a life. In any case, so it was that book, although Saint Laurent himself never named it, but it could probably only have been that book, in which he saw color reproductions of Mondrian's work, and which inspired him to make the series of at least 6, actually more, but there are 6 core outfits that he made and presented in August 1965. Now, I want to just point out that right around the time that Yves Saint Laurent was looking at reproductions of Mondrian's work in order to, which inspired this tremendously popular, come to that in a second, series of dresses, what became major modern artists, pop artists, including Roy Lichtenstein, were also looking at reproductions of Mondrian's work and being inspired by them. These are 2 paintings. He also made a couple of prints that were based on Mondrian reproduction, to the same extent that Yves Saint Laurent didn't like copy a painting and stick it on a dress. Neither did Roy Lichtenstein, but the fact for Roy Lichtenstein and other artists, pop artists, that they were thinking about popular culture and thinking about Mondrian not as some difficult to access, very cerebral painter or writer, but as a kind of iconic figure whose work had by now circulated, who they'd been taught to see as ubiquitous in contemporary culture, their own environment, and so on, enabled these artists to think about Mondrian in a very different way, not as actually an influence, but as the same kind of like brand, model, iconic brand as some of the other things that Wesselmann shows in the modern kitchen. And he makes that modern kitchen into a kind of savvy, mimicking a Mondrian composition with the white sink acting as a white plane and so on. And even this door could open. So he wanted to press upon the accessibility of Mondrian, the fact that Mondrian was everywhere, and he was everywhere in reproduction as part of contemporary pop culture. And that's very similar to the ways in which Mondrian's work kind of worked with Roy Lichtenstein and a number of other pop artists. But those are the most important ones. What also happened with this Mondrian dress is that it was immediately inspired, first of all, a very positive reaction among journalists, but also just a giant number of images circulating in women's magazines and widespread mass cultural contexts. It also, and immediately, inspired countless knockoffs, some of which you were supposed to make yourself. This one is hilarious. It's in a book of, you can knit your own Mondrian dress, and so on. So these were dresses that were called Mondrian dresses, but they were inspired by Yves Saint Laurent's Mondrian dress. So the brand, if that's what we should call it, of Mondrian has this kind of additional complication that there is another author in the mix. And I'm not saying at all that there weren't exhibitions of Mondrian's paintings, there weren't books about Mondrian, but there was a really interesting intersection of how he became widely visible in popular culture. And as far as I'm concerned, many people know the Mondrian dress and can get from there to, oh yeah, he was an artist, he was Dutch, he was whatever. But I think the Mondrian dress by Yves Saint Laurent is just a tremendously important moment that put Mondrian on a stage that, I'm sorry to say it, but no amount of exhibitions in any museum could probably equal. So, however, there was at that time in the Gemeentemuseum a Mondrian gallery. And it turns out, and I can't tell you all the incredible details I've learned about this since I started working on it, but I'm working on it right now, so this is hot off the press, one could say. So there was in 1965 a presentation of 3 Saint Laurent dresses in the Mondrian gallery at the Gemeentemuseum to accompany a costume curator's lecture in the auditorium about these dresses and about op art dresses as well. What fascinated me about this was the seemingly performative sense of these young women standing in front of those paintings and doing something bodily to correspond to the paintings, to get those dresses to be corresponding. All of them apparently are still living. This one, she was 24 at the time. It's 60 years later. She's 84. I met her. Totally lively, remembers how fabulous it was to be able to wear this incredibly expensive dress, even for a few hours. What she told me was that, she really wasn't aware of the Mondrian paintings behind her. She had been told how to perform by the photographers who were taking these pictures, even before the audience from the auditorium got into the gallery and so on. So I have a lot of work to do, because if they didn't know that that's what they were doing, it's a little strange, I think. But there are a lot of photographs, and the dresses, you can see, don't necessarily look great on everyone, or put it this way, some of them fit the dresses better. They weren't obviously made for them. They didn't have the opportunity to, shorten the hems or anything else. But like the photographs are really hilarious, and there are quite a few of them. And the accounts are peculiar too. But anyway, that's another topic. This happened in The Hague in January 1966. So just toward, as these dresses were becoming better known in Europe, there was a huge reception in the US. It took a little longer in Holland, but there was also many knockoffs and actually Mondrian underwear and nighties were shown in the Stedelijk Museum. So, it's amazing. Okay, so I want to flash now to just our own moment because I think it's really, really fascinating that Mondrian and Mondrian dresses in particular, are being acquired or have been acquired by two very prominent museums in the Netherlands. The reasons for those acquisitions are quite different. And we could get into that later, but I'm not going to get into that now. But the first was the Rijksmuseum. I was really surprised. I didn't know that the Rijksmuseum has a very, very important historical collection of Dutch costume. But now this is the most contemporary item it has in its collection, and it functions in a way to be both a Mondriaan and a Saint Laurent in ways that are really important for this museum, which is now getting into the collecting of 20th and 21st century art. On the other hand, the Haagse Gemeentemuseum also bought a Mondriaan dress, and that dress obviously complements its almost 300 works by Mondriaan, but it also works to make them more accessible, which was one of the reasons why the director in 1966 wanted to have this performance of Mondriaan dresses, because he thought it would help people understand or get excited maybe about the Mondriaan paintings. Not clear if that happened. Or not. But anyway, obviously there's more that could be said, but what I want to just point out is that in those acquisitions of these dresses, this comes from a phrase from the director that the museum was able to buy this dress for a insanely good price. It was very inexpensive, and in comparison to the one acquired by the Rijksmuseum, that's very true. But what I think is really interesting is the way in which Yves Saint Laurent appears here, making good sense, but with the painting that is the painting that looks most like one of his designs that was in the collection of Yves Saint Laurent and Pierre Berger. So we're seeing here that there's a historical dimension to and referencing of the whole history of the Mondriaan dress and its relationship to Mondriaan as these items come to be acquired. And just to end, there is also another dimension to this, because there is a young Hague designer who has been working with the Gemeentemuseum principally through the museum shop to make a Mondriaan dress. He's very much aware of Yves Saint Laurent, but of course he's working with the museum shop at the Gemeentemuseum, so he's surely aware of Mondriaan. But this dress lives in the shop of the museum, and yet in the way it was introduced in Dutch magazines and so on, I think it's really interesting to see that this was literally set up in order to mimic the kinds of relationships that were forged in 1966. There's a historical kind of knowledge there that makes this relevant to this, and as well as to the paintings. And it's important to understand that this is a commercial enterprise in which the museums are very much collaborating when they show this Mondriaan dress in various vitrines in their museum shops. And in this photograph is a group of representatives of Dutch museums and of the tourist industry who are gathered at a Berlin tourist conference. And of course, all the women are wearing this other Mondriaan dress. And it comes to be actually, in a sense, emblematic of the Dutch engagement with design. Here's what is said by the designer. This is from his website. During the ITB Berlin conference, the ladies of the Rijksmuseum, Van Gogh Museum, Gemeentemuseum, and the Hague Marketing and Holland Marketing bureaus, I guess, wore the Mondriaan dresses of Michael Barnard van Bergen to underscore the leadership of the Netherlands in the field of art and design. So I think that's really interesting as well. And this brings me back, finally, I'm sorry it was so long, to what's going on here. Very recently, a new coin was struck to commemorate, in part, I guess, the 80th birthday of Yves Saint Laurent. This coin is available today. It's worth 10 francs, but it costs 69, or euros rather, but it costs 69 euros to buy. And maybe, you know, I won't read all of this, but there's what I think is really so interesting about the issue of the coin, the fact that the coin shows the Centre Pompidou, the face of Yves Saint Laurent, and the Mondriaan dress, which is in the front and in color. It gets a lot of attention, kind of, you know, continues this way in which maybe French art, French artistry ties back into the couture industry and also Mondriaan, and eventually that Mondriaan dress resonates with American popular culture as well. So that's my analysis of why the Terra chose that image to put on its, it's a little wordy. So thank you.
Wow, thanks both of you for these fantastic and very, very rich presentations.
Is it working?
Yes, now it's working. Actually, Nancy, I can answer your question having worked on that newsletter. And I think you'll appreciate the answer. Part of the reason for choosing the dress was, of course, in homage to you and to your book, which was very much on our minds, and it's a gorgeous cover.
It's on the cover.
Yeah, go have a look at it outside. And also another reason, it reproduces so well. But another reason is as you're quite sensitive to, image rights, which are significant. So also we wanted, it's very eye-catching and it gets people's attention clearly. So yeah, those are some of the reasons. Also, Mondriaan not being American.
Well, in fact, also that's the thing you don't mention. It's more sexy than a Mondriaan painting.
It's more sexy than Mondriaan.
When it fits well. But do you think that is the question I wanted to ask? Do you think it is bad for the work of Mondriaan to be in the position that in a field in which all this fashion and other things are happening?
Well, you're asking the wrong person, because I don't think it's bad, I think it's interesting. I think it has lots of potential implications. I think it can do many different things, one of which is it can attract interest to Mondriaan, which is what I argued, I think, against the sort of reigning modernist paradigm that all fashion is mere fashion and so on. I think it's really interesting that it comes at a time when fashion exhibitions are spectacularized and drawing huge publics, and spending in museums on fashion design and so on is at a very high point. So I think there's the potential for things not to be so great. I think it's really, and then I think it's mostly like really fascinating to think about how something as iconic as that dress, which is only becoming more what art historians call canonical. It's just very, very central. And I think the dress that you've acquired in your museum, or the museum has acquired, is a good second iconic the one that just has one. And I'm actually, really interested in why those things are true. But in any case, my point being that when the artist has to be, I just don't know what it means to have the collapse of their two distinct authorial.
Well, it is a way. I think it is a way of guiding this ununderstandable art into something which is livable. Let's say, because what I didn't touch upon was that this Mondriaan with one A has also been protected very much by modernist theory in which a work of art is a very autonomous thing which is completely devoid of any connection to the average life or to dirty things like people or love or whatever. It's something which has to be analyzed in a formal way, with clinical, in a clinical formal way, with clean hands and with a white like a surgeon. And and I think we are in the 60s. That was really what Wijsenbeek did with these three women posing in front of Mondriaan was anathema to all the American museum people and Harry Holtzman. Everybody protested, and I think. Harry Holtzman was also very much against Yves Saint Laurent and all these dresses. And maybe that is also a reason why Yves Saint Laurent didn't choose to reproduce paintings by Mondriaan directly, and also this Miss Brownie and other people, because they were chased already then by Harry Holtzman.
Harry actually
reproduction rights.
Didn't do it. I mean, he regretted it. He wished, because he realized he could have
made money
off it.
Yeah.
But he wasn't. Anyway, he knew that he had missed his opportunity by the time he got really conscious of the possibilities for copyright infringement actually benefiting him. He was annoyed with himself for not going after that. But yes, I think.
So maybe then it was the big museums in the United States that were prohibiting reproduction rights to private,
possibly,
people. In any case, when I started to work in the Gemeentemuseum, it was also I didn't give any permission for photographic reproduction when it came to business. Then we got away, and that is a modernist attitude. And I think nowadays we are coming a little bit. This loosens up a bit, isn't it? And I think personally that it is not bad for Mondriaan when, for example, this young guy or this monnaie française, with which people earn money. I think it will not affect the quality of the work or the stature of this artist. I think it will. He is such a tremendous painter that everybody who looks at the painting of his knows exactly and immediately the difference. There is this beautiful story that the son of Emily Tremaine, the first owner of Victory Boogie-Woogie, was in the meeting of the board of trustees for a whole day, or the board of the company for the yearly thing to be decided, and he was opposite for the whole day, opposite this painting, and had to go to dinner to his mother in the evening, and he decided halfway the day to say to his mother that it was a shitty painting. It was bad, it was not good, this victory boogie-woogie and abstract painting is a fraud. So he went to his mother and was a bit nervous that he had to tell it to her. And then he was sitting at the dinner table opposite another version of the painting. And then he, you know, after the first course, he decided, well, this is much better. You know, this is really working. And it turned out that the thing that was in the boardroom was the copy made by Pearl Fine in 1946. Mm-hmm. And the thing that was hanging in the dinner room at home was the actual Victory Boogie-Woogie painting. So he didn't tell his mother. This is a story he told me himself. Yeah?
I'm interested in the kind of difference between Mondriaan's own wish of utopian wish that his compositions would transform society, and so the spillover from his painting into the world would make, through its abstraction, kind of take out all the opposition. I mean, the whole kind of wish of Mondriaan to change architectural environments and everything would also kind of change behavior of man. And then if you see what is happening here, this kind of spillover actually does not quite do that. It confirms the Mondriaan in its own, as you say, autonomy or entity, and it's as if the carrier of the design can change, but actually the Mondriaan stays its own. While, and maybe in his theories, he thought that the whole world could become that type of composition. And it's so different in a way from the other artist who has been adopted by the public, which is Hopper, and whose reproductions, especially the Nighthawk, also kind of preserve the iconic quality of the painting. So there is this kind of interaction between high and low and whatever, between painting and real life, but it doesn't really take away the distance. I think and maybe that's because it's modernist art and it couldn't do away with that distance.
Well, the only thing I can say is that he himself thought, he was asked by Van Doesburg in 1922 to work together for this architectural exhibition in the Galerie Rosenberg in Paris. And first he was very much involved in the project, and he wrote even letters. There is one in the vitrine to all the members of the style, that all corals had to be discarded and everybody had to work together to make the best result possible. But in the end he turned away. So he was he didn't work together on the project, and Van Doesburg took over, and there was no contribution of Mondriaan. And I think that was because he was, in fact, all in all, he was a painter. So he was very fond of dancing, for example. He was he thought dresses for women had to be straight and elegant, not curvy. And but also, for example, the traffic distribution on the Place de l'Opéra, which seemed to be at the time very, very busy, but also very, very well organized. He thought that was wonderful because there were no traffic lights at that time, and so. But the French people found ways to have traffic that went against each other. So left and right, there was no roundabout, as we do it today, but it was very, very dangerous, actually, I think. But the distribution of traffic on the Place de l'Opéra, he found a perfect example of neoplastic neoplastic way of life. So it was not really the abstract painting that took over reality, but the opposition of contrasts and the working together of contrasts. That was his cup of tea. That was what he liked. But he also said to people who were asking him to work together in architecture or whatever, in the 30s, let me be alone, I am a painter. And I want to find things out in the realm of painting. So he wasn't at all interested in Yves Saint Laurent. I think he would have detested it, but on the grounds that it was not original enough, that it was not enough of itself, because that was something he asked of everybody. He thought Yves Tanguy was a good painter, and Miro he thought was a good painter, because they asked everything of themselves and they were really doing their utmost best to produce as best as possible, seeking their own oppositions and seeking their own battles. And so I think he would have thought this was not interesting. What do you think? Like Bridget Riley, you know, a contemporary artist who worked in the 60s with these black and white paintings with, you know, optical effects, and she was in a show, The Responsive Eye, in the MoMA in New York, and overnight she became, you know, she was reproduced in fashion. In '65, all over New York, every girl walked in a Bridget Riley dress, and she wasn't aware. She flew into New York for a show, and she saw it all over the place, you know. When she looked left and right, she saw all these people walking, and she thought, well, nobody can look to my paintings for the next 20 years. But she decided, being a very good artist, I think, she decided to go home and to paint, you know, to do her own trade, to do her own thing, and she made a tremendous body of work. And in the end, it didn't, the whole fashion industry, it went on for 1 year or 2 years, and then it slided away. And, you know, it didn't hamper.
Well, I think the questions that you're asking are very different. Maybe this is another way to articulate how to think, you know, one way to think about it is the artist's own encounter with what she experienced as, the first thing I can think of is rip-off, which isn't quite the right word, but, you know, she felt violated by what had been done. Nobody had asked her, and I think it made a big difference that she was a woman and she felt like her work had been feminized and to boot and so on. But so I think it's interesting to think about what Mondriaan thought about fashion, because as Hans alluded to, he had ideas about it. And I don't know them as well as probably he does, because he's read a lot more of the correspondence. There's almost nothing published. But it's clear he thought about himself and his own clothing, and that he liked men's clothing, and he liked being the dapper man you see in the photographs and all of that. So he had that. The other thing that he also had was he liked heavily made-up women, and pin-up women a lot, too. Again, this comes from testimony from people who knew him. But I think the question I'm asking is to acknowledge that what's going on, or what I think is interesting, is how the engagement of Saint Laurent and others who come after Saint Laurent and appropriate Yves Saint Laurent in Mondriaan, has kind of complicated, or maybe not complicated, made much better, or whatever, made certainly better known, the legacy of Mondrian. And I think it's really significant of a moment, I guess a postmodern moment, that the curator, who is taking care of however 100 plus Mondrian paintings and 200 drawings, is telling us that, like, this is great, and this is, and Mondrian, whatever. Hans, I think, is embracing this in a way that I don't think would have happened in quite the same way when a Mondrian knockoff kind of dress would have been for sale in the museum. Anyway, to me, I'll come clean and not, keep this going. But I didn't realize until I spoke with the woman who is the costume curator in the Gemeentemuseum, which has also a very important collection that comes up to the present day. But she told me, because I was like expecting to hear her say, well, it's really terrible that this guy is, exploiting Mondrian and Saint Laurent, whatever else he's doing, she was absolutely not like that. She basically said, I think it's great if he can do well with his designs, and he was so much, it made me feel like, somebody, like I was protecting, I don't know what, from, I felt extremely old-fashioned, let's put it that way, that I didn't have this view, which I think used to set the commercial in opposition to, let's say, the modernist art in the serene white galleries especially of the museum, as we've all, probably, some of you look really young, so maybe you weren't trained to think of it that way, but I was. So what I think is, on the other side, interesting to think about is Saint Laurent having been, there have been exhibitions that have really focused on his interest in fine art. Known to have had, together with Pierre Berger, and a collection of the highest possible order, both when it was sold, made a lot of money, but it was also totally top quality. So it may be the inverse, which could be more productive in a certain way to think about. Rather, let's just say then, would Mondrian have liked it? Hard to, Hans knows him better than I do, so if he says he would have hated it or whatever, it's no doubt true. But I still think there's room for, there were parts of it that he liked. And maybe he wouldn't have felt good about how it handled his paintings, but I think he could embrace the notion of fashion, perhaps more than we think of when we think of the modernist paradigm, as you were saying, of the paintings in their hermetically sealed, pure environment.
Well, I'm going to hand it over to the audience. I just wanted to pose a question in thinking through these materials. We use the Mondrian, we use the Yves Saint Laurent dress in our communications. That's what we've been talking about for quite a while now. But there's all sorts of other commercial objects that you've shown that bear the imprint of influence by Mondrian, and much earlier than the Saint Laurent dresses as well. You had the 1949 MoMA exhibition that mentioned the Kleenex boxes, right? And then there's all these references to linoleum and flooring. I think in your book there's a picture of high school lockers, the Mondrian high school lockers, and all sorts of much more banal, not fun, arty, fashion, mode type examples of whether it's appropriation or just coincidence, I don't know, or outright use of the Mondrian brand and the Mondrian name. Is there a different way of approaching these more mundane examples than there is of the fashion, the mode and the media, la mode and the media, or can they be thought in the same way? I think the question of what Mondrian would have thought is probably, it's probably a moot one, but is there a different way? would he have perhaps liked the linoleum, or to be on linoleum or Kleenex boxes? He might have, considering how much stock he put in his environment that he was working in. That's not the question I mean to ask, would he have liked the linoleum or not, but more when we think through these high-low questions and afterlife questions, does the nature of the exact object that is doing the appropriation, does it change the analysis?
I want to say just one thing about that, which is that in 1974 or 76 or whatever, there was a room that Mondriaan had designed that had never been made. It was for a German collector, and a drawing of that room was sold by Harry Holtzman to the Pace Gallery, I believe, and they want to sell it. This big drawing of this interior didn't have color on it, although there had been other drawings with the color indications. And what they did when they got together with Harry Holtzman was make a mock-up of this interior, and they made it out of Formica because at the time, in the mid-70s, and probably also Harry Holtzman felt like this, precisely about these kind of ideas about the future and of realizing Mondriaan's dream of an environment that would have this kind of pristine quality. And anyway, as far as Harry Holtzman and, forgetting his name, it's the same director of the Pace Gallery who's still doing it, they agreed.
Arnie Glimscher.
Arnie Glimscher. They did make that thing, and it looked, it was supposedly even truer to Mondriaan than Mondriaan could. But what it showed was, in fact, that there were other commercial issues of how you sell a drawing that otherwise doesn't look, and maybe some other things from the estate that were on scraps of paper. So this thing made an incredible draw to the gallery. But the other thing that it did was to see Mondriaan through the lens of, on the one hand, contemporary art. There were a number of other artists at the time. Art Schweger is one of them, who were working in Formica. That's one side of it. And the other side is that I think it really did come out of the idea of Mondriaan as being pristine. And that comes from those...
And being reproducible.
Yeah, and that comes from reproduction, what you can see in a reproduction.
It's very funny that this Victory Boogie-Woogie painting, I'm collecting the copies, and I think we have now 12 or 13. People who...
You can order your own on the web.
Who paint them. And for all kinds of public purposes in Holland, it is reproduced. Every famous man or woman from a village is asked to paint one square, and all that. It's very funny, and it's also what Glimscher and Holtzman did. The reproducibility of the man is very interesting. And I must say, maybe it's also, I was thinking about this, about the whole idea that fashion and Mondriaan and the relationship between this is changing, in Holland at least. That might have to do, I don't want to overplay my role, but I am detesting it. So every now and then I'm asked to, for the last 20 years, I think once a year I'm asked to sit at a meeting where placemats and tea mugs and things are on the table to be judged. And I'm looking at it and thinking, well, if you want to drink tea from such a mug, it's okay with me. I mean, and the placemat with the Mondriaan motif, I'm not, it's not my thing, but go ahead.
Just don't ask me to
Don't ask me. And it has maybe also to do with that every now and then, less and less, But every now and then I come across a letter sent to me with a neoplastic Mondrian that is discovered, you know, somewhere in a cupboard or in an attic or in a room or on the backside of another painting. And I have to judge if it is a genuine Mondrian painting. And I always can see at first glance, even in reproduction, if it is or if it is not. Because, you know, the abilities, the craftsmanship involved in producing a Mondrian, a real one, is so enormous that you immediately sense it once you have seen enough of this work. And so I think it is rather a busy job. So I'm concentrating on the artwork and on explaining the artwork and describing the artwork and making it available for people. And I don't want to get involved in all this fashion shit and whatever. So I leave it alone, and maybe that is the reason that it is playing such a bigger and bigger role in Holland. But I'm pretty convinced that it will not intertwine or mix up, or it will be separate. You know, there is lots of Michelangelo Last Judgments and David sculptures around, and they don't affect the original one. So
maybe it is reassuring for you then to know that the Louvre Abu Dhabi Museum, to be opened next year, bought the painting by Mondriaan from the Yves Saint Laurent Pierre Berger sale, and they did not buy a dress.
Aha! Very good. well, but maybe it is good in Abu Dhabi to also buy the dress, because it makes people more vulnerable for the appreciation of one or another.
It's a complicated issue.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Are there any other questions from the audience or comments?
I have one question. So why do you think today it's important for Mondriaan to be a AA if what you know, granted there's a large portion, I mean, I guess he can't be AA in the pre-1914 galleries and single A when you're showing Victory Boogie. Anyway, I just want to come back to that issue because I do think what you're pointing to, but in a different way than, let's say, the American team on that exhibition. Anyway, I want to just come back to, does he have a multiple sort of identity?
No.
Or not? Okay.
No. So in Holland, the pre-1913 galleries are having labels with AA, and the after 1913 galleries have AA as well. Because he was Piet Mondrian from the beginning to the end. And he did apply for American citizenship, but he died before he got it. But on the application was AA. But I don't want to say it has to be AA, because I'm pretty happy with Americans or French or German people doing it with 1A. You know, everybody goes his have his pick. Yeah.
We have a question.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you both for your wonderful presentations. I'm an early modernist, so I'm a bit out of place here, but I am interested in migration and integration of artists, and I'm wondering, my question is for Dr. Troy, to what degree did the Mondriaan's Dutch nationality play a role in his reception? Because we've heard that he distanced himself from the old-fashioned Dutch art, although I do believe from my old-fashioned point of view, that he probably did still use his network and his to arrive in Paris and to work here. So maybe it was only stylistically that he distanced himself. But in his reception after his death, was his Dutch nationality still mentioned, or was he rather seen as an international painter, a cosmopolitan, however you would want to call it?
It's a really interesting question. Most of my research was done in the US, where I don't really believe that he was seen as having the kind of Dutch identity that some early scholars actually assigned him, like, you know, the landscape of the canals and flatness and all of that has, for a time, been a way to explain Mondrian and de Stijl that I don't think it wasn't particularly strong in the States. And I don't know as much about the Netherlands. Obviously, in the Netherlands, there would be a much more nuanced idea of what Dutchness would have been. I think it's significant, I guess, or one other way to answer your question, there are two other points to point out. One would be that Mondrian, when he left Holland, he did not go back. After World War I. He went back during the war, that's where he was, but pretty much as soon as he could leave, he did, and he resented what he felt, I think, was the backwardness of the country. Nevertheless, there were modern painters and architects who did support Mondrian, who bought his work, on occasion offering it to a museum, like on the occasion, I think, of his 60th birthday, for example, and more than once this happened. So he did have the admiration of a small group of people. He did show in the sort of major museums in Holland. So I think all of that is relevant. I think more to the point, maybe also, would be to ask why France, the French never didn't purchase a Mondrian for a public collection until after Yves Saint Laurent and Pierre Berger bought their first Mondrian. There's an answer or an answer has been given, whether it's correct or sufficient, I don't know, but that is that at the time the French were still really attached to the École de Paris, and, you know, anyway, I also don't know enough to judge that, but I will say that the claim has been made that Saint Laurent and Pierre Berger were extremely important in making Mondrian more visible, but I'm not, you know, or somehow anyway, being ahead of the game in France for purchasing Mondrian. But do you have a more?
Well, the only thing I can say is that Mondrian, also later in his life in New York, always stressed that there was no difference, real difference between his abstract painting and his landscape painting. It was all the same. It was, the difference was only that the landscape painting worked from past traditions and from representational schemes, as I may call it so, and offering a view on a reproduced world, a represented world. And abstract painting was working from properties, to say it bluntly. So a white plane and a black line have properties that affect each other and that work together or work against each other. And so, you know, line, plane, color have workings in a painting that show their properties and may be appreciated in the same way as in a red tree, for example, a blue red tree, or in an average landscape where also lines and planes and colors work together to offer a view on to a reproduced world.
But this, I don't think this is to be connected to his working in the Netherlands and his working in Paris. I guess, did he identify with the French painters and the French?
Oh yes, he was from day one. He was on the brink of everything. There couldn't have been anything going on in Paris, and Mondriaan wasn't there. He was also called Piet zie je me niet, which is best translated as Pete, don't you see me? Oh. That meant that when he went to some opening or gathering or whatever, festivity, he was also ready to show himself, you know, and to be seen, especially by pretty women. Yeah.
I think if there aren't any more questions or things that you'd like to say to each other, we'll wrap up there to give everyone a chance to talk a little bit more directly and also to have a look at the displays that are there. Last chance. Paragraph. Okay. Nancy, Troy, Hans Janssen, thank you so much for this.